Good evening. First, can anyone tell me what's the absolute best way to deal with Lyme disease? I'll tell you, the best way is to not get bitten by a tick in the first place. So that's kind of the theme here. Part of the theme is prevention rather than cure. So I'm Wayne Marquis, longtime Charlton resident, longtime outdoor person, fishing and hiking and all that. So I've pretty much been bitten by anything that can bite you in Massachusetts. I'm also old enough to remember when getting bit by a tick was kind of an unpleasant experience, but it wasn't really considered to be a big health issue. And once Lyme disease came on the scene, that certainly changed everything to where it's now, can be a life-altering, life-threatening condition. And my background is biology and chemistry, and my career is mostly in R&D. So when Lyme came around, naturally I researched it. This was before Al Gore invented the internet, so you went to a place like a library. And what I found is that there were some things that you could do to minimize your risks that really weren't all that difficult and all that expensive. And so over the years, I've kind of shared that knowledge with a lot of people and friends. And then a few years ago, I think Kathleen Walker mentioned to me that there was a tick site on the town website. And when I looked at that, it was pretty outdated, and some of the information really was not correct. So I kind of worked to help, update that. And again, I was pretty happy to kind of share that information. But then, really, just in the last few years, I've talked to a number of people that have had either Lyme disease or anaplasmosis, something, a tick-borne disease, and spent, multi-days in the hospital, spent multiple days and multiple months post-treatment. And when I said something like, "Well, I bet you're pretty religious about using permethrin in your clothes," I pretty much got well, what's that? And so it occurred to me that at least for those people, that the medical folks that they dealt with really focused 100% on the cure and 0% on the ways to minimize getting the disease in the first place. So I approached the Board of Health and proposed an informational meeting like this one tonight. And the Board of Health certainly jumped right on that and said we'd be happy to sponsor that. And that's kind of how we came to be here tonight. I'd like to thank the Board of Health for their support. I'd like to thank a lot of the people at the Earth Day events here in town. There's a lot of activity here, and they helped to spread the word. Drew Anderson has set us up so that we're recording this so it can be shown on the public access channel. And especially to Betsy Perry, who did a wonderful job of setting this room up and did the flyers. So that they did a great job. So this evening we have Dr. Stephen Rich, who's a professor of microbiology at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Steve asked me to make sure that he's not a medical doctor. He's a researcher. So he's here to tell us really about the biology of ticks and what can be done to keep you out of the hospital. Steve is also the executive director of NUVEC, and Steve, I'll let you explain what that is.
Great, thank you. Thanks everybody for coming out on a Monday night. So, as Wayne said, I am a professor And I've been doing this I've been studying ticks and tick-borne diseases for about 30 years, 35 years. I started when I was 10. So, and I have the memory of telling my grandmother, neither of my parents went to college, my grandparents didn't go, that wasn't something that they did. And so I have this memory of telling my grandmother when I was in graduate school, she'd say, "What's going on?" And I was in graduate school, I said, "Well, I'm studying Lyme disease, Grandma." And she'd say, "That's fascinating. That's very interesting." She'd want to hear about it, Thanksgiving time. And then I'd come back that next year and she'd say, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm still doing research on Lyme disease." And she's like, "That's fantastic. Any news?" And I, "No, not really." So I had this experience of coming back year after year and having to sort of say, I'm just doing the same thing. And the reason is that, you may know this, but a lot of research that gets done in universities doesn't necessarily have endpoints or necessarily applications. And so I kind of grew into that notion that I was working on an important problem that had a lot of curious puzzles to be solved, and I was interested in those puzzles. But it was really 10 or 15 or almost 20 years into it before I realized that I really got to figure out more than just the puzzles. I got to figure out practical things and how to reduce the incidence of this stuff. And so I think it was about 10 or 15 years ago that I started to come down out of the ivory tower and come to meetings like this and try to explain what it is that I'm doing, what it is that we can share that's useful. So what you're getting is 10 to 15 years of experience on that, but still a work in progress. So what I understood from early on when I started doing that, so in other words, when I started going out and speaking to audiences like this, knowledgeable, intelligent people that are facing these problems but don't necessarily have all the little bits of information, was just, the jargon that we build up, that we talk, that goes on in us. I just carry that with us. And so I just started untying some of that. But when I first I'd go out and I'd give a talk as if I was talking to colleagues and using all that jargon. And it wasn't very effective because I wasn't answering the questions that people come to meetings like this in the evening, the questions you bring. So what I want to do tonight is I want to try to tell you a little bit about what I understand first about the risk associated with these things, because rather than instructing you on how to do things better, I want to educate you to understand the problems so that you know why it is that you would do the things that you do better. So I'm going to use just a little bit of an example that ties into COVID of all things, because there's a lot of similarities between what I saw happen in COVID and what I've experienced with ticks and tick-borne diseases. And then I want to turn it back to you. If you want to participate, you can use a device. If you have a phone, you can point it at menti.com and use that code. And I can actually ask you questions. So I can query you about what you know about ticks. And that, in a very real way, is a way that I can tell you what I know about ticks, and we can figure out where the truth lies in the middle. So if you want to do that, you can just point your device to menti.com and then put that code 61893056. It doesn't capture any personal information. You don't have to download any apps or anything like that. And it's just very ephemeral. I do this a lot with students, and it's a good way to communicate. That's another way you can do it. You can access the QR code there. And if anyone's in it, now you should have an image that asks you this question or poses this topic of ticks make me think of, and then you can enter something there that you want to think about, just to see if it's working okay. Beautiful. So that will remain, and you can jump on as we go along and we can answer more of the questions. It's not absolutely necessary. Gross, sick, yes, absolutely. All of those things, disease, blood, exactly. Let's look at some. So one of the reasons I do this is, you remember this movie from the 80s, but I have this experience of teaching students and standing in front and doing PowerPoint. I call it death by PowerPoint. You just roll through PowerPoint slide. I like to have it a little bit more interactive, and then it's a little more fun for all of us. So here's what I learned in those days is that, first of all, your lived experience matters as much as what I learned in the laboratory. And so I'll try to understand what you've experienced, because everyone's been bitten by ticks probably in this room at one time or another. And that everybody's seeking simpler solutions. Like we hear this very often, like, just tell me what I need to do and when I need to do it to stay safe. So I hear that, I understand that, and we'll try to speak to that. And then, of course, we realize that a lot of people are up against fear. So again, that also ties into what happened with COVID. The fear of the unknown, largely. And what I'm here to tell you is that it's something to be concerned about, but not something to be fearful about, because there are very practical things that you can do. So let me start by asking this question. I don't know how well you can see that, but do you know how many ticks, how many species of human-biting ticks there are in Massachusetts? Do you think there's 1? Do you think there's 3? Or do you think there's 12? What would be your best guess about that? Wow. So it may seem sometimes like there's dozens, but the truth is there's 3. And here in Charlton there'd be 2. So there's the deer tick and there's the dog tick, and we're going to show the differences between the two. Because the dog tick is basically a nuisance. It does carry, yes?
How about the Lone Star tick too?
The Lone Star tick is number 3, but not really here in Charlton yet. So it's more on the coast. If it shows up here, we'd like to know about it, but it's mostly on the coast now. So it's actually supplanting deer ticks and Long Island. It's starting to do so on Martha's Vineyard. It's encroaching on the Cape, and pretty soon it'll sweep into here, just like Lyme disease did 30 or 40 years ago. But it's the black-legged tick and the dog tick that are 2 big ones. And the dog tick's basically the nuisance, just a pain, doesn't really carry many diseases, or very, very rarely so. And the main culprit is the black-legged tick or the deer tick. It's the same thing. So there's 3 species that are associated here in Massachusetts. 2 of them are in Charlton. So tying back into that question, so if I ask you this question, if you look at these 2 individuals sitting in a bus station or airport or wherever they are, who would you say presents the greater risk of COVID-19 to you? And you can select one or the other, or you can just raise your hand if you think it's the person on the left. How about how many people think it's the person on the right? Okay. So what I want to do is use this as an opportunity to think about risk and how we understand risk. And I'll use an example here of a risk on the left side, which is a low risk situation, and the risk on the right side, which is a high risk situation. And what I can tell you, and you can see for yourselves, is that the threat or the hazard in both instances is the same. That the shark is on the left and the shark is on the right, and what makes the difference in the risk is really the exposure. So this person, wisely on the shore, has almost 0 risk, even though the threat's there. And this person on the right has a higher risk because they're swimming with the sharks, right? And that's going to help us to sort of comprehend what's going on in that picture that we saw a moment ago. There it is. There's someone assessing their risk about whether they want to go in the water. What I would say is that you really don't have enough information about anything from this particular situation, because what we're thinking is, well, he's not wearing a mask, so he could be breathing all over us. Or some of you may be thinking, she's wearing a mask, so she probably has something that she's worried about not giving to other people, so maybe she's the greater risk. But the truth is, just looking at the picture, we don't know if the hazard's present in either one of them. Neither one of them may have the virus, and so both of them could pose exactly the same risk to us, which is 0. So we sort of jump to these conclusions when we don't think these things through carefully, which now you probably would get it. So then, if I do the same thing and I ask you, is this a risky tick? We don't know, right? Well, there is some information we can gain from that, because we can look at this tick and we can know that this is a deer tick. And so at least it has the propensity for being one of those ones that distinguish. So the first message I would give you is that there's great value in being able to identify the tick species. And it's not terribly hard. I'll show you some pictures of them in a second that will help you to work that out. And we can ask the question, are all ticks risky? Which I'll answer that question tonight too. Because even though that tick is riskier on average than a dog tick, because that's a deer tick, not all the deer ticks are infected. There's a certain number. Well, this time of year, it's about 50%.
Question.
Yeah,
But Mary mentioned, how do we know that's a deer? How do I know that's a deer?
I'm going to show you in a minute. I'm going to show you some nice pictures that compare, and we'll look at the two. But what I'm trying to get at is that the risk that you usually think about, the thing that we're fearful of, the thing that we're all most concerned about, is these kinds of symptoms. So there's a swollen knee, that's a typical sign of Lyme disease. There's a rash that someone has on the forearm. There's also a palsy, a facial paralysis that's very often associated with Lyme disease. How many people have bitten by a tick? Everybody. How many people have had Lyme disease? Have you had these symptoms, the palsy? Or?
None, nothing normal.
Fevers are the big. For me, it's fevers.
I'm sorry.
Fevers, the big thing.
Fear is a big thing, absolutely. So that's the risk we're worried about, and that's the hazard we're worried about. It's contained inside that tick. And what's happening is it's not just the tick, it's the bacteria that are inside the tick, or in some cases the viruses that are inside the tick. And the thing that we want to mitigate is to know what that exposure is. So the scenario is just like the scenario with the shark. It's there, the thing is present, there is a risk to us, but it's mitigated by what that exposure is. And so what we want to be able to reduce is that exposure. Because we're hard pressed to figure out how to reduce the ticks. If you wonder how we got to this point, it's really because of the proliferation of white-tailed deer. So all of these deer ticks and lone star ticks proliferate, they breed on the back of white-tailed deer. And if you lived in this area for any length of time, you know that the population of white-tailed deer has just gone up and up. You probably didn't see them in your backyard 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Now you see them in very high numbers. That's what's making this risk, this exposure much higher, because there's many more ticks out there. So there are three things you should understand about that exposure. Three things that can help you to understand your risk and hopefully allay some of that fear, because you can sort of get your hands around what the risks are. The first one is, just as we said before, to be able to know the tick species, to distinguish between different tick species. And as I promised, I can show you what that looks like. There's the three species of tick, the one the gentleman, this is the lone star tick, all four of these. This is the dog tick, all four of these. And this is the deer tick, or the black-legged tick. And what's going on here is they're a larval, basically a baby version of the tick, a nipple tick, and then the adult male and female. That's the male and that's the female for each one of these species. So larva, nymph, adult, larva, and nymph. So you look at those and you're like, well, to give you some idea, that's about the size of a poppy seed. And fortunately, these ones that are smallest and most difficult to discern one from the other, they're not really much of a risk to us, because every tick is born without infection. They have to acquire infection from something that they feed on. So these guys are kind of out of the equation in terms of risk. If you get bit by those tiniest ones, that one, or that one, they generally don't have pathogens. They definitely don't have Lyme disease, so they pose the least risk to us. And those ticks are active in the months of late July through late August into September. And we usually don't really even see them very much on ourselves. Sometimes you'll catch them on your cat, occasionally you might find one or two on your ankle, but the best time of year for ticks is actually those months of August and September for the black-legged ticks. The next one is the nymphal tick. That's the next life stage. Those will be active starting in a couple of weeks from now and through July. And they are kind of, to an untrained eye, or to someone with not very good vision like my old eyes, they are kind of hard to tell these two stages apart. But again, these you don't very often encounter on people. You don't find them on people. So really, in that nymphal season, the ticks that you have to worry about, if it's one of those small ones with 8 legs, then it's one of the deer ticks, and it is one of concern, one to be aware of because they carry Lyme disease.
Say that
It has
again.
egrets.
Sorry?
Say that again.
These are the ticks.
Stage,
Sorry?
we have to be careful of the lymph stage.
Yes, yes. All the ticks in the months of May, later part of May into July are the ones that could carry Lyme disease that you should be concerned about. Right now, the ticks that are active are these two and these two. And we already established that these really aren't relevant to Charlton. They're not really moved that far west yet. And so you can see how easily these can be discerned. This has a very noticeable orange margin on the back. So if you see that orange spots on the back, you know that that's a deer tick. If it's just a uniform black, you know it's an adult deer tick. And then the dog ticks have an altogether different shape. You see how this is called ornamentation on the back of the tick. It's actually kind of a mottled, it's not showing up very well here, but they have sort of a yellowish green tint on the back. They're very recognizable, very easily discerned one for the other. So it's these that you want to be on the lookout at this time of year for Lyme disease. And soon it will be those species. And so if you find it, yes?
I don't know if I can ask a question now, but which one is the one that would bite you, the male and the female? Or which one is the more dangerous one?
So the more dangerous one, interestingly, is the nymphal tick, because it's the smallest. So the game we're going to see is the ticks. When a tick feeds on you, everyone had dinner, so when a tick feeds on you, it's a little gross, but they stay on your body for days. Like these adult ticks, they can stay on for 4 or 5 days. And they actually need to stay on you for several days before the bugs that are inside, the germs that are inside them, start to come out and into your body. That's what makes these most risky, because they feed the same rate as these, but they're much smaller, so they have a higher likelihood of going undetected on your body. And they don't feed on the palm of your hands, you know. They get, I say they feed on the parts of your body that form a Y. So they're in your groin and under your arms and all this kind of spots where you really have to look carefully and dig them out along your hairline, that kind of thing.
You said that, you know, when they're born, you know, they're not infected with any bacteria. So do they pick that up from feeding on, say, a deer that some other tick is infected?
Rather curiously, they pick it up from feeding on white-footed mice and not from deer. So our lab actually was one of the labs that figured out that there's something in deer blood that kills the infection, clears the infection, kills Lyme disease bacteria inside the tick. Yeah. So they have to feed on a white-footed mouse in order to get infected. So those are the same pictures again. There's the deer ticks, there's the dog ticks, and the Lone Star ticks. And I can give you a card that shows this that you can keep around so that you can distinguish the different species. And what you need to know is that, well, it's the fancy word here, but Lyme borreliosis, that's Lyme disease basically, that's associated with this species and this species only. Something called Babesia and Anaplasma, which they just don't have, unfortunately, common names like Lyme disease does. They're also transmitted by these. So this time of year, the adult ticks that are feeding, the adult deer ticks that are feeding on people, about 50% of them have the germ that's associated with Lyme disease. About 10% of them will have Babesia, and somewhere from 5 to 10% of them will have Anaplasma. So these are the things that you're most fearful of. Yeah.
Now, I've been told, you just said you thought it took days for the virus to transfer, that it could take as little as 15 minutes.
No. No.
Watson, I might be saying it incorrectly. What I was told that it could transfer in as little as 15 minutes.
Yeah. What you're confusing or maybe misremembering is there's a virus called Powassan. Did you say Powassan?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just didn't hear it. Yes, the truth is that Powassan can supposedly transmit at a faster rate than the others. I didn't hear the beginning part of it. Yes, because it's a virus and it's found in the mouth parts, it's thought that that can be transmitted much quicker. But what I can tell you is that in a study that we did, where we looked at ticks that feed on people, like about 120,000 of them, we found 120,000 different instances of people being bitten by ticks. We found 38 of them that were positive for Powassan, and we followed up with the people that got bitten by those ticks, and 0 of them got disease. So the meaning of that, we think, is that this more closely resembles what happens with things like West Nile virus, which you hear about as a mosquito disease. Many of us have antibodies because we've been exposed to West Nile virus in the past, but we don't get sick from it because our immune system basically knocks it out. And so it's either elderly folks or very young people that may have a higher susceptibility, or in some cases people that are otherwise immunocompromised. But in the laboratory, you're right, there's evidence that Powassan can move out of ticks into laboratory animals in as little as 15 minutes. But our experience is that, again, the 38 out of 120,000 ticks that were positive for Powassan that fed on people, we didn't see any incidents of disease. And they certainly fed longer than 15 minutes.
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna have you repeat yourself. So you're saying that I've had mine, that tick has been on me for days before?
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, so this is goes back to the point I said at the beginning about the lived experience. So that's one thing, that was the learning lesson for me. So in the laboratory, when we put ticks on a mouse and see how long it takes for that mouse to get infected, it takes on average about 48 hours. Now that's an average, meaning it could be a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, or maybe a lot longer or a lot shorter in some instances. And so it's possible that your experience is that, which I think you're probably trying to tell me, that
I don't think it was there for days.
you thought a tick was on for a shorter time.
Yes.
So it's entirely plausible, but it doesn't change the fact that the average is
The average,
48
yes,
hours.
okay.
I would, however, say that we also have the experience of lots of people telling us that, I'm going to show you in a minute, that the tick was not on them for very long because they just find it, or on their kid for very long, because they say, I give that kid a bath every night and I check around. We know that ticks feed at a rate that's very slow, and I'll show you how we can age the tick based on how its body size has changed. And for the most part, the ticks that are associated with transmission disease are much bigger, as you'll see. So I don't doubt that you had an experience that
Yeah,
was
no,
really...
it's just gross.
Yeah, I got it. Any other questions? So what can you do about it? What can you do about keeping ticks off? Wayne already alluded to some of that stuff. One is just that you can wear proper clothing. So we always tell people to wear light-colored clothing, and then to tuck their pants legs in their socks if they're going to be outside. If you're outside hiking. Why that fashion statement? Because ticks always get on you. So ticks don't crawl. They don't jump. They don't fly. They don't fall from trees. They almost always start from the ground and work their way up. So they almost always get on your feet and then crawl up. And so if a tick gets on your foot and then crawls up your pant leg on the outside, it's more likely that it'll either get brushed off or that you'll find it and pull it off before it gets to where it wants to be, which is feeding on you. So that's why I tell people to wear that. I'm not wearing, I have my Red Sox on tonight because I'm a Red Sox fan, but I always wear White Sox when we're out. Eric, I didn't introduce Eric. Eric is our new PhD candidate in the laboratory that he goes out in harm's way a lot more than I do these days and catches ticks, and he always wears his White Sox. So yeah, light colored clothing, tuck your pant legs in, and then check for ticks. Those things, there's no chemicals involved, there's no real heavy duty, there's no risks to it, and it can make a real big difference if you do the tick checks. And maybe if you're working in the garden, every half hour or so, just take a look down, see if the ticks are crawling up on your leg, pull them off, and do something mean to them to get rid of them.
You know what I do? I put them in a piece of Scotch tape and fold it over.
Yes.
So they'll never escape.
That happens right now. You hear people do that. The other thing is people keep like jars of alcohol. People have big jars full of them that little tick mortuaries. Now, if you if you have if you want to go another step, you can do one of these things, which is you can treat your clothing, as Wayne alluded to, with something like permethrin. So permethrin is an acaricide. It's a synthetic acaricide that resembles a compound that was originally isolated from chrysanthemums. It's very, very deadly to ticks, something like 2,000 times more deadly to ticks than it is to us. It's a poison basically to ticks. For us, it has a very good safety profile. Permethrin is in, if you go into like Agway or whatever you call your local feed stores, a lot of the bug dopes and that are used for horses and different agricultural products and for livestock, they contain permethrin. So permethrin's been long used.
Tractor Supply is.
Tractor Supply, that would be one. And this one I like is by a company called Sawyer's. I just like it because it has a pump spray, but you can also get it in aerosol. I like the pump spray because I find that sometimes the propellant isn't as much, there's not as much propellant as there is product in the can, and so you don't always get it out. Read the instructions, but basically the idea is you lay your favorite pair of gardening or hiking shorts out or pants out, and then you spray them, you let it dry, so then the chemicals impregnate into the fabrics, they're engineered to do that, and then when the ticks crawl on the fabric, they absorb the chemicals through their feet and that kills them. And it's quite gratifying actually to watch a tick start at the bottom and they basically don't get up to your waist before they fall off and die. Question about permethrin? Yeah.
It says street clothing, can you put it on your skin?
You don't want to put it on your skin just because it wouldn't be effective. And it's not that it's terrible for you, it's just that it'll just wash off your skin. It's engineered to adhere to it's made to like basically adhere to the fabric. The product that you would want to put on your skin is something like DEET or picaridin, so things that you use to repel mosquitoes. The best sort of EPA standard is about 30%. You can buy products that are 100% DEET. You can buy them at 5%. It seems like the optimum is somewhere around 30%. That one you do apply directly to your skin. And the way it works is it literally repels the ticks. So Eric does these experiments where he shows that you put a repellent down and the ticks don't want to touch it. They turn around and go the other way. So you do have to treat most of your body. And the parts of your body that you don't treat aren't protected, by, as one would understand. And the other downside of repellents is that they only last a few hours. So you have to perpetually be reapplying them. That's true for both protecting against ticks and mosquitoes.
And LL Bean sells clothing that's been treated with permethrin.
Thanks for reminding me of that. Yeah, so LL Bean, REI, there's a bunch of different companies that you can buy that they already have the permethrin-treated clothing in it. It's a little more pricey than putting it on yourself, but.
So if you spray your clothing with this stuff, when you wash them, you have to be careful.
So read the product labels, but it's usually 5 to 6 washes that we feel confident that will stick around. Some of the Insect Shield is one of the companies that makes the LL Bean type products, and they say in some cases 40 washes.
Yeah, that's what they said. But I just took all my gardening clothes and laid them out in the garage floor, soaked them with permethrin, and I don't even wash them, I just wear them.
Same.
It doesn't,
I have a pair of hiking pants that I don't wash them. I dry them out in the sun,
Yeah.
and off they go. Yeah, then you're not having to reapply. Don't forget your shoes, because they start on the low. So your gardening shoes, you've got Crocs on now that wouldn't be very effective on Crocs, but your socks, definitely treat your socks, because they start down there, lower in your body. I have a pair of bright colored socks those are my permethrin socks, that I just always wear the same ones.
I think Insect Shield is the one where you can also send
Send
your
your
clothes in. You don't have to buy from REI, where if you got a favorite shirt or whatever, you send it to them and they apply it in that fashion that goes more than 6 washes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so you guys know all about those tick-safe measures. And then, of course, you can try to do something that will reduce the ticks in your backyard. So there are things you can do to kill questing ticks. So questing is, I'll show you that in a moment. or you can kill ticks on hosts, or you can reduce and modify host population. So you can try to do something to reduce the abundance of deer. I told you we got to this problem by having so many deer. Practically, outside of certain island situations, we're probably never going to put that genie back in the bottle. The deer herds are large now because there's less hunters, there's less predators, and we've managed landscapes in a way that's just ideal for deer. So the way we like our nice New England properties with rock walls and forest edges and all that kind of stuff, it's just perfect for deer. And so unless something like chronic wasting comes along and kills deer in high numbers, they're going to be pretty
Excuse
numerous.
me, I'm confused. Didn't you say that it was the white-footed mice?
Yeah, yeah.
Not the deer?
Yeah, that's confusing because there's two cycles going on here. There's one cycle that involves ticks getting infected when they feed on a mouse and then infecting other mice when they feed on uninfected mice. That cycle goes around, tick, mouse, tick, mouse, tick, mouse. That's the Borrelia cycle, that's the germ cycle. That's how the bacterium is maintained. The ticks, as it turns out, they have to go as an adult to feed on a white-tailed deer in order to breed. So the tick cycle is mouse, deer, mouse, mouse, deer, mouse, mouse, deer, mouse. And without the deer, the tick cycle breaks. But the deer has nothing to do with the germ, with the Lyme disease germ transmission cycle. I'm sorry I don't have a slide for that tonight because I know it's a little bit confusing.
Are they the carriers?
Sorry?
They carry the deer, do they carry the tick to other places? Is that how it spreads?
They move it around, but birds also move them around.
And did I hear you correctly earlier when you said that there's something in the deer blood that kills Lyme?
Yeah.
And they're not being able to extract from that the serum to give to humans.
Right, so we take the blood serum, which is the cellular portion of the blood, minus the red blood cells, and we put that into a medium where we grow the germ, and it's enough to kill the bacteria. We haven't isolated what it is in that blood that actually is effective. We think that it might be something called complement, which is, we all have complement. You have an immune system, you know your immune system with antibodies and all that stuff. We also have a complement system that kicks in immediately when you get exposed to a virus or bacterium. One of those is called your complement system. We think the complement of white-tailed deer is more effective than the complement of humans against these things because they co-evolve with them. So, but we haven't figured out what that component is. If we did figure out what it is, it's not likely that we could put it in a syringe and give it. We don't know for sure, but what we are thinking is that maybe we could use that to modify, like mice, for example.
Basically, the deer is just traveling around, delivering the ticks all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. There was a question over here. Someone was.
Yeah, you said that it can be transmitted, but do they attach themselves to birds too?
They do attach themselves to birds. Most birds aren't involved with the Lyme cycle. They are involved with moving ticks around.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple like thrushes and American robins. They can maintain the it's called Borrelia. I keep calling back on the fancy name, but the bacterium.
Mm-hmm.
But birds are how they get from Virginia to Connecticut. That's not happening on the backs of white-tailed deer generally. Oh, so I guess the point was here that you can do things like, I don't know if that's common around here, but on the Cape and on the islands especially, people will very often spray their backyards with products like bifenthrin, which is a synthetic compound that kills ticks. We know it kills ticks. You can put ticks in a jar and you can show that it kills the ticks. What we're not so sure is that if that's really an effective strategy for reducing the number of ticks. The way it usually works is if this was a yard, you would treat the perimeter, which is where the ticks are, because ticks don't like fine cut grass, like your neatly cut lawn. They won't go there. They'll go to the edge where it meets the forest, where it meets the wooded areas. So on Cape and Islands, they'll treat those perimeters, and it'll kill the ticks there. Lasts about 30 days, and then the ticks come back. So what you're basically doing is creating a little barrier that might keep the ticks out for a length of time. Our center, which I'll tell you a little bit about at the end, is conducting a study now where we're going into backyards where they're doing those treatments, and we're trying to see if that really is effective. Looking at yards that are treated, comparing them to the yards that aren't treated, and see if they're actually having an effect in reducing the numbers. if they do reduce the numbers, it's not clear that it even changes the Lyme disease picture because we don't know necessarily where people most often get bit by ticks. We know, again, coming to back to people's lived experience, very often people will tell us, I wouldn't go out in my garden without wearing my permethrin-treated clothing, my pants and et cetera. And you say to them, well, do you wear them when you go to the beach or when you go on a hike? And they're, oh, no, I didn't think about that. And so it could be that people get exposed someplace where they're not realizing they have that same risk.
I have a question about the barrier spray.
Yeah,
It kills ticks, what other things does it kill?
lots of other things.
Yeah, so it does kill beneficial.
Yep. So, it can. If you sprayed it on a pollinator, it would kill it, or a butterfly, it would kill it. It's generally not considered that it probably does that too often because where they spray it is in the leaf litter. And bees don't generally go into the leaf litter, they're going for flowers. So they purposefully try not to spray flower beds or places where butterflies and pollinators might end up. But yeah, the chemicals are not selective. Another thing that our center is working on, and have a couple of products now, is development of what we call bee-friendly acaricides. They don't kill pollinators, but they have a high toxicity against ticks. Thing is, while we've developed those things in the laboratory, the milestones to get it through EPA approval are pretty wide, so it'd be some time before we'd be able to actually see those products.
Is it also true that there are no birds in this part of the country that eat ticks?
Probably. So opossums eat ticks. The white-footed mice, they eat ticks. It's just a numbers game. They don't eat enough ticks to make a difference. Years and years ago, Christy Brinkley. Remember, Christy Brinkley was married to Billy Joel. She became a big proponent of guinea fowl. She thought that guinea fowl were eating ticks, and so she was a proponent of this. Many people got guinea fowl. Guinea fowl do eat ticks, but again, they don't eat enough ticks to make a difference. They don't eat all the ticks.
Your chickens,
Sorry?
your chickens, like we were.
Yeah, chickens eat ticks too, but we've had chickens, we have backyard flock. We still have ticks because they can't eat them all. What I want to talk about just a minute is that going back to that thing about length. So this is the second little piece of the risk that's very important. And I want to explain to you why it is important. And I'll do that by just showing you this video that shows you what ticks do. So ticks, first of all, remember they don't fly, jump, or fall from trees. What they do is they quest, and this is what questing is. She literally, that's a female dog tick. She goes out, or deer tick. She goes out to the end of a branch, and boom, she waits for something to jump on. She's not drawn to any cues. She's not smelling that person walking by. Once she's on the host, then she is making decisions about where she's going to feed. We don't, understand all of those decisions. That's one of the things that Eric's trying to help us to figure out is what it is that makes them feed on your left leg instead of your right leg, or your husband instead of you, or however that all sorts out. There are some selective things that happen once they get on, and we just don't understand the biology of that at present, but it's very different from mosquitoes. And once they're attached, they'll stay there for many
Can
many
you tell
days.
us what the best way is to pull the tick off?
What's the best way to pull a tick off you?
Yeah.
As soon as possible.
Right.
So,
I've read all different things, there's little evidence of this light match.
yeah, so the things we say don't do, don't light a match and put it on your skin because you'll burn yourself. Don't put dish soap on because that's not going to do it. Don't put nail polish on because that's not going to do it. What you want to do, and that's basically the lesson here, is this is the inside of the tick. And what I've drawn here is just a bacterium. This little star represents the bacterium. What happens is ticks are one-way systems. The blood comes into them, into their gut, and then later she'll spit saliva out. That's what's shown by this thing. And what we know is that the germs are in the gut, and ticks can't regurgitate. It's physiologically impossible for them to regurgitate. So things only come into the tick when they're feeding. And then later, months later, when she's taking her next blood meal, then and only then will things come out of that tick into somebody else. They have to actually undergo this process. So And in that process, months later, when they're feeding, they have to go through this 24 to 48 hour length of time. And every minute that you get under 24 hours or 48 hours increases the chance that you don't get anything. So if you wait to take the tick off, or you put things on it that you think are going to kill the tick, like nail polish may kill ticks, but they have such a slow metabolism, you really don't suffocate them for hours and hours. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking, you're getting more and more of that exposure. And all the other things, I can't even remember all the different things. The best thing is to pull the tick off as quickly as you can. If you have in the house a pair of fine tweezers that are forceps, you can get right down close to the skin and pull it out. If you don't have that, you're out in the garden and you want to get the tick off as quickly as you can, use your fingernail and get it off. Because there's another myth, which is that if you break the tick or you squeeze the tick, that you're going to somehow squeeze the contents of that tick into you, and that's just not the case, because that tick, it's not a syringe. It's not like a hypodermic needle that you go and you get blood. In fact, it feeds in a very different method than mosquitoes, which are like hypodermic needles. They really go right into your veins and they draw your blood out. What she does is she makes this little pool of blood that she then brings in all these different components to it. And all that takes a lot of time. And so it's just the physiology of it that things only go one direction. Yeah, I think I'm getting a little sidetracked.
Some people think that if you just pick it up, you leave part of the head in it or something.
Right. So as soon as the tick is dead, which is when you pick it off, that does occasionally happen.
Did it all come off?
If it doesn't all come off, if a little piece of the mouth part remains behind you, that tick can no longer give you Lyme disease. So if you didn't get Lyme disease when you pulled the tick off, you have no risk going forward of it, because that's just a little piece. Now, that little piece that gets left behind, just like a sliver of wood, could lead to another infection. So you'd want to wash it with some soap and water, and maybe put some rubbing alcohol or that kind of thing on, but it's really no more risk of Lyme disease. Yeah, so I got a little bit sidetracked there, but the short story is get the tick off as quickly as you can, and if you leave a little piece of it, that's okay, as gross as it sounds. And it's not uncommon to have little pieces left behind. I've had that when I'm bitten by ticks, and sometimes it'll take a couple of weeks even for that little piece to move out.
And I think
What do you do with the tick?
the older information was on the town website. You know, if you pull a tick on, throw it in the toilet, flush it. But I believe now the thing that you're supposed to do is save that for the medical people, that they would prefer to have that so that they can examine it and perhaps find out if it has Lyme.
Yep. So you can test the tick. So I'm kind of taking it slowly, but there are three things that you need to know: the species of tick, how long the tick fed, and whether the tick was infected, and that's what you're talking about. You can only figure out if that tick was infected, if that's a risky tick, by having it tested by a laboratory that's capable of doing that kind of testing. This is to that point that we talked about before. These are ticks that have fed in a laboratory situation, so not on people, but there's the ticks that starts out, the nymphal tick. That's what it looks like after 4 days of feeding on a mouse, big raisin type of thing. This is an adult female tick. That's the size after 7 days. So, as I was saying before, if we see a tick like this, it wasn't on for 24 hours. Ticks can't get that size in 24 hours. That's basically what a tick looks like after 24 hours. That's a tick after 2 days. So we can time how long the tick has been on based on how it's called morphology, how the shape of the tick has changed. And that basically has to be done by someone that's an entomologist or an expert. So the University of Rhode Island has a website called Tick Spotters. If you get bit by a tick, you can take a picture of it, you can send it to Tick Spotters, and then they can give you an estimate of how long that tick has been feeding on you, and that'll give you some idea when you go to tell your doctor, pull this tick off, it looks like it was fed for 3 days, and your doctor will know that that means that there's higher risk associated with that tick bite. Those are just other pictures showing you ticks that haven't fed very long. This shows you the type of variation. These are ticks that we received in the lab before, and they don't look like those nice neat pictures when they're fed on mice. So then that last little piece, which Wayne was alluding to, is you can have the infection status. You can determine whether the tick that bit you is associated, it has a germ inside it. And our laboratory for many years tested those ticks at the University of Massachusetts. During COVID, and it's a fee-for-service, during COVID we sort of moved it off and we created a small company. We still test the ticks. It's the same fee structures that we already had, but it's now run as a company off-site and not part of the University of Massachusetts. There are other organizations still, University of Maine test ticks, mostly for Maine residents, but also Connecticut Department of Agriculture. So going back to that example I showed you before, as with people, not all ticks are infected. Not all people are infected, not all ticks are infected, and so you can use a laboratory to have the tick tested. These are numbers I alluded to before. Burley rhodophyta is the cause of invasion of Lyme disease. 30 to 50% of the ticks have it. 5 to 10% have this thing called Babesia. I told you that these ticks are mostly a nuisance, but there are some rare germs that are associated with them. This is called tularemia, Francisella tularensis, sometimes called rabbit fever. So rabbit hunters know it because rabbit hunters occasionally, when they're butchering a rabbit, will cut themselves and they'll get infected with these things. They're also transmitted by ticks at very, very low frequency. But if you're trying to understand like where the real risks are, they're all up here with this ticks that have much more higher infection. These guys, Lone Star ticks, I mentioned that they're not really out in the western part of Massachusetts yet, but they are associated with different pathogens that we could worry about in the future. I don't have a slide to talk about it tonight, but you may have heard of alpha-gal. Does that ring a... Yeah, so alpha-gal is a really weird thing that's caused by ticks. But every risk that people associate with ticks, whether it's Powassan virus that you were asking about or Lyme disease, they're all about microbes that live inside the tick that get out of the tick and into you and make you sick, with the exception of this one thing called alpha-gal. Alpha-gal is a sugar that's introduced during the feeding to you and leads you to get an allergy against red meat. So you'll hear more and more about this. There's still so much to be understood about how it actually works, but it seems to be associated primarily with these ticks and primarily in the southeast where those ticks are most abundant, although recently it was found that there was a case associated with those in the state of Maine. But the upshot is you get bit by one of those ticks, you get this sugar that comes through in the feeding, and then later you go and eat a cheeseburger and you have an allergic reaction. And the allergic reaction could be anything from, a stomachache that you'd feel like if you had a nut allergy or something like that, to some people have anaphylaxis, so they have a very violent reaction and end up in a hospital room. So very much needs to still be understood about that, but if you have an experience, especially if you're in the Cape or the islands, and you have an experience in the summer when you might have been associated with one of those ticks where you develop what seems to be like a digestive issue, a problem with red meat, you might want to think about that and share that with your doctor that there's this phenomenon. Alpha-gal. Alpha is A-L-P-H-A, the Greek letter, and gal is G-A-L, just like the gals. It's galactosidase is the name. Yep.
I notice with dogs and cats sometimes, I don't let the cats out anymore, but when they did go out and the dogs, if they would get a tick, we would check them and check for the ticks. There'd be a big fat tick. And then we'd try to get one, there'd be another one right under it. Like it was waiting for that to fall off and then take over. Is that what they do? Oh, a lot of times we would find that.
So how do I put it politely? That's an amorous moment between those two.
Really? A big fat tick?
Yeah. So she and he are making babies.
Oh, okay.
That's how they breed. The female feeds, and then the males find the females and
Oh.
have that romantic moment.
Also, another thing, this must be a myth, but I remember reading this a long time ago, probably 15, 20 years ago. And it was something legitimate, it wasn't on, Instagram or something like that. It said that ticks, it was an article about ticks, that the ticks are so heat sensitive that they could fall out of a tree at 70 feet and land accurately on a deer going underneath. Except they don't come out of trees.
No. And they never find themselves up 70 feet in a tree.
No?
No. We're hard pressed to get them to climb a yard up off the grass. Yeah, just not in our experience that kind of thing happens. And they really don't, black-legged ticks in particular, and this is an unfortunate thing because if they did, black-legged ticks aren't attracted to anything. They don't, you can put odors like associated with people or CO2. Lots of mosquitoes will be attracted to CO2. They'll be attracted to heat. They'll be attracted to our body odors. These black-legged ticks are not interested in any of those things. They just crawl out and they wait for something to go by. They're very non-discerning. They're very open in their tastes. And that's unfortunate because if we could figure out something they were attracted to, then we could at least try to lure them in and kill them. We could create traps that would bring them in, but we haven't really figured out anything to do that yet.
Excuse me, can you just spell that word again? A-N-A, what was it?
Alpha-gal?
Yeah.
A-L-P-H-A. Gal, G-A-L.
Okay.
And I have to warn you, like, in the internet, if you Google that, you'll come across all kinds of things. And I want to say that it's still like very much it's the wild, wild west of Lyme disease, of tick-borne diseases, because you'll hear lots of stories that don't quite sound, we hear people like having exposures from shampoos that contain animal products, which are just trace elements. It's not clear that all of that is so valid. So if you want to learn, the places I would recommend, the trusted sites would be like the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. That will have a site on alpha-gal. The Centers for Disease Control have good information on alpha-gal. There's a group out there called the Alpha Gals. A couple of women that put this webpage together. Very well-meaning, but not necessarily the best science. And there's a lot of that on the internet.
Does it last for years and years, that red meat?
Another one of the mysteries, it lasts for a period of time in some people, but some people it seems to be self-limiting. So some people, like, it's just a summer thing and they're better. Other people, it goes on for years. It doesn't seem to be something that lasts lifetimes yet, but yeah, it's a mystery. But you may know that allergy is a bit of a mystery altogether. Like, I have an 18 and a 20, almost 21-year-old, and one has a meat allergy, one has a nut allergy, and the other has a sesame allergy. We never had those things when we were kids. We don't remember hearing those kinds of things. So we still have a lot to understand about the nature of allergies and how we got them. This is just another one of those.
The reason what interested me with this is because a few years ago, we went to a beach, my daughter went to the beach, and the day after, it was just like sick of the chewing on to eat, and just sick forever, serious digestive issues, and went through all kinds of testing, and could never really find out. It's just funny how you said that. She
Where
was
the
fine.
beach? Which beach?
This was a beach in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And we went one day, went out to eat, and the next day it was just like, it went on for a few years.
Like diarrhea and the whole nine
Yeah,
yards.
constant go back, she'd go back. It was just like she had lost a lot of weight. It just came on like that. So that's why I said.
Is that ongoing?
Well, now she's better. Now she's better, but it was going on for a few years after. It just came on so suddenly, and like I said, she went through, all kinds of tests with doctors and everything. Could never really pinpoint what it was. I would check it. I'm surprised when you said that. Check into it. You never know.
One of the downsides of it is there's not a test. You can't walk into a doctor's office and say, test me for
Test for
alpha-gal.
that, right.
Because the way it works is your body has antibodies, right? And we know the antibodies protect us, but it's a type of antibody called an IgE molecule that actually induces this immune response. And not everybody has them, but some people have those IgE antibodies and they don't have alpha-gal. So you can't just test and say, oh, this person has it, so a lot of people have it and don't have that disease. So a lot of confusion and a lot of desire to try to narrow it down. We do work with the immunologist, his name is Scott Commons, he's at the North Carolina State. He was the guy that first identified this. And the advice he always tells us to give people is test your diet. Just like if you're working out, like if it's with a little kid, if it's a nut allergy or whatever it is, try to take red meat out of the diet, see if those symptoms go away, or take, little by little, try to narrow down to what it is that's causing that stuff. So I don't know if anyone's still logged on, but the next thing I just have are a bunch. I was going to do like some quizzes a quiz to ask you for different questions. But I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll kind of rip through these. I don't know if I did a leaderboard in each case, but there's all these assertions basically that are based, or these, I call them the Lyme disease myths. I think there's 7 of these. There are things that people think they understand about ticks and tick-borne diseases and Lyme disease that are not necessarily true. So for example, that ticks transmit Lyme disease are too small to be seen with the naked eye. Thank you, you know that that's false. Not all of us have great eyes. I mentioned before, I don't. But it's important to understand that they're not invisible. They're not they're not microscopic. They're not little flecks. You can find them. And we want people to know that because we want people to continue to be checking for the ticks on their body. You can see them. And as they feed, they get larger. And so they're just that much easier to find. And some of the ticks are actually quite large. Here's another one. If you find a tick in your body, you should remove it immediately. Hopefully I convinced you of that. Yes, don't wait around. Don't wait till you have the perfect tool or the perfect set of tweezers. Get it off as quickly as you can. It's great if you carry tweezers in your car or have it in your medicine cabinet and you can use those, but if you don't have them available, don't wait till you drive home 2 hours from the Cape to pull that tick off.
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I've been told, like some people think if you find a tick that bit you, you don't know to take 3 days of doxy, and then there's another group that says, no, that's not going to do anything, don't do it. What's your opinion?
So I don't know if you heard that, but some people say that you take doxycycline after you get, so doxycycline is an antibiotic that's used to kill the agent of Lyme disease. And it is the primary treatment. So I want to say 99% of people that get Lyme disease, that get treated early, take a 2 to 3 week course of antibiotics, they will resolve, that will just go away. But I understand what your question is, and I'm going to answer that one. But I want to say that doxycycline is a very, very effective way to kill Borrelia. What you're talking about is prophylaxis. So the idea is you don't get diagnosed with Lyme disease, you get bit by a tick, and then you take, it's usually a 2-unit, 24-hour dose. You take 2 big doses of doxy, and the idea is that you nip it in the bud. And there's only one study done on that to suggest that it works. There haven't been follow-up studies to demonstrate that it really works. But docs still do use it. And the reason is, the downside of it is so low. Like there's really no risk in giving 2 little bits of doxycycline. It's not going to induce resistance. And for the most part, most people can tolerate doxycycline unless they're children under the age of 5. So they do it just sort of as a safety measure. Whether it's doing any good is another question. We don't think it does any terrible harm, but it may not actually be solving the problem.
So I guess my question is, if you do the few doses of doxy, whether your doctor does the 2 or the 3 days, do you think that is going to prevent you from getting Lyme, or are you just saying you don't know? You could still end up with a rip-roaring case.
So what I'm saying is I know one...
I guess what would you do? That would be...
What I'm saying is there's one study that says that works, and there's no follow-ups. What I can tell you I do personally, my doc gives me doxycycline. It's in my medicine cabinet. If I get bit by a tick and I don't find the tick soon enough, I take 2 hits of doxy. I follow that exact procedure. And then I watch the site of the bite, and I look for the telltale signs, which are the red rash. I look for any, and I've never had what's called a titer or teeter that is, I've never had antibiotic. I've never had Lyme disease. And I've been bitten by lots and lots of ticks. But it's because I get them off early. And actually, I have a bit of an allergy, and many of you may be in this situation. I have a bit of an allergy to ticks. I feel them crawling on my body, and they don't last very long before I find them and pluck them off.
Yeah.
We're trying to understand that as well. Like, what is it about? Is it just because I've been exposed so many times that my antibodies have sort of been built up? Let me get through this because I want to just get to the end, and then I can answer more questions if you want. If you leave a tick's head stuck in your body, it can still give you Lyme disease. I went over that one a bunch of times. Hopefully people agree with that is false. A tick needs to feed for at least a whole day to transmit Lyme bacteria. That's the average. So some of you feel like that is true. Some of you are still wondering whether that's true. If you get a positive test result from Lyme disease, it means you have Lyme disease. How do you feel about that one? So the Lyme disease tests are antibody tests. They don't test whether you have infection or not. They usually test whether you have antibodies against the infection. So then it's up to the rest of the clinical diagnosis that your doctor does to figure out whether you actually have the disease. So don't think that a positive test necessarily means you have infection, and rely on your doctor's diagnosis to try to help figure that out. Lyme disease can be cured. Do you think that's true or false? So as I said before, very high percentage of cases of Lyme disease can be treated with doxycycline, just a couple weeks of antibiotics if you catch it early. So we all know stories. I hope your stories didn't go into the extra innings kind of version, but it's the cases that don't get diagnosed and don't get treated and go on for months and months that can be very, very difficult to treat. And that's why we very much encourage, as Wayne said, the piece of prevention. And prevention means keeping ticks off you, but it also means catching it very early before you get into any of those advanced systems. But it's very treatable.
Another question.
Yep.
You said that you believe 2 weeks of doxy is enough, because I have some doctors saying 10 days. Some people say 2 weeks. I've had another doctor say, oh no, they did that completely wrong. It should have been a full month. And it's like, what do you do?
Yeah, it's 2 to 3 weeks is the normal. What you'll often see in the, I don't even know if I want to go there, but in people that get into these advanced stages where it gets caught very late, you'll hear people taking they'll be on a pig where they're taking 24-hour antibiotics, and there's no evidence that really has any efficacy. Once it's got into those late stages, it's not clear how we get rid of it other than trying to manage the symptoms. So 2 to 3 weeks of antibiotics when you
So if your doctor tries to give you just 10 days, should you say, no way, that's not enough?
I don't want to answer that question. Deer carry Lyme disease and transmit it to deer ticks. Is that true or false? Yeah. Hopefully I convinced you of that one. That one always comes as a little bit of a surprise to people. But I've been asking that question now. I've asked literally thousands of people because a lot of the students in my classes, and very often people get them incorrect. So that's why I sort of single those out as ones that I try to emphasize to sort of set the record. That's the number of people that get those questions above correct when I ask those surveys. I'll just finish up with a couple of things just to remind you that this is the abundance. So these are ticks. This data happens to be from 2017. It looks every year pretty much like this. The blue bars are the deer ticks, and notice they have a bimodal distribution. There's, as I said before, they start sort of April into June, July. There's a switch over here between from adult ticks to the infant ticks in the blue bars. So dog ticks and Lone Star ticks, these data are for Massachusetts wide, so most of this activity is on the Cape and Islands. But they are basically just summer. And I show this because I want to remind people of two things. One is that ticks come back in the fall. So starting around, I say it's usually around pretty close to Halloween that you can start to see this peak. And then they're there until the snow falls. And the other thing that people always seem to forget is that there's a real quiescence. There's not many ticks in the months of August and September. And I always share this story that for many years I coached my kids' hockey team. And so I would see parents that I hadn't seen all summer in September, and they'd say, hey, it's a great great year for ticks. There aren't many ticks out there. Because what they were doing was they were looking at what they were seeing in September, and they were remembering what they saw in June or July of the last year. So they're thinking it was a good year, and I would remind them that, no, there's never ticks in September. It's always quiet season for ticks. And if you're gonna go to the Cape, that's the best time to go to the Cape, August and September. I mean, it's the most crowded time as well, but if you're gonna go to the beach, those are the more tick-safe times. So this is my little motto, so be tick-safe. See how I did that? Understand the threat is a function of exposure. Keep ticks off the person is the preferred way. Just do whatever you can to keep them from getting on you. But if you are unsuccessful in doing so, you can take actions to mitigate the risk. Remove the ticks early. If you haven't kept them off you, get them off as quickly as you can. Consider testing the tick for pathogens because, again, the tests that they do for disease are the tests for antibodies in your body. And if you did get exposed, it's going to be a couple of weeks before your body has an immune response, and so would test positive. So a lot of times you go to your doc and you say, I got bit by a tick, and the doc will say, come back and see me in 2 weeks, because only then can they really do the test. With tick testing, if you test for the actual tick to see if the pathogen, the germ is inside it, you can do that immediately. Doesn't mean that you got it, but it does give you an indication about whether you got had that risk factor.
How do you test it?
You don't, but a laboratory can test it for you. So you can Google, like the Massachusetts Department of Public Health cites a bunch of different testing laboratories that do that.
Is using Scotch tape, which I just did that this week, because I saw it gone for a car, and I got Scotch tape to do, and I did that. Can you bring that, if you got bit by one, can you bring it in with Scotch tape on it?
A very easy way to collect ticks is with Scotch tape. A very hard way for the laboratories to get them out is to get them out of that Scotch tape. So if you're going to use the Scotch tape, the best is just to use, like, stick it to the Scotch tape and then stick that to a card, like an envelope or a piece of paper. If you make like a little Scotch tape sandwich, they're really tough to get out that way. And then you can make these decisions based on what's risky. I think my last slide is just to remind you. So I'll ask questions at the end, answer questions. And what I'm doing here tonight is part of the New England Center of Excellence in Vector-Borne Diseases. So in 2022, we got a $10 million grant from the Centers for Disease Control to set up this center. It's housed at the University of Massachusetts. I'm the executive director. Eric's a student. There's actually 8 or 10 people in our laboratory. There's collaborators at the University of Maine, University of Rhode Island, University of Connecticut, Western Connecticut State, Northern Vermont University, and University of New Hampshire. And it's a regional center. We're doing 3 things. We're testing, I alluded to some of those testing, testing new ways to control ticks, including vaccines that can be used against white-tailed deer, to kill ticks on the back of white-tailed deer, a bunch of other things that I won't go into. We're educating the next generation of people that are going to do what I'm doing, which is communicating this information to you, but also figuring out better ways to do this in the future. And then we're building communities of practice. That's the third part of the center. So community of practice means we're trying to reach out to all of the folks that are actually confronting these challenges and working with you, trying to give you the best practices on what you can do. Because the truism of ticks is that there is no agency out there to do anything about them. So you know mosquitoes, you have a mosquito control. I don't know offhand whether Charlton is part of a mosquito control district.
No.
You're not. So there are 8 of them across the state. About $11 million of state funds goes into surveilling for mosquito diseases. And when they're found, they will spray. Sometimes they do larviciding, which is killing the larvae. Sometimes they do spraying, which kills adults. There's no comparable body that does that in Massachusetts or any state for ticks. The expectation, because there's never any new money for things, is that we're going to do our own thing to keep ourselves safe from ticks. So all the things I'm telling you are things that basically fall on us as citizens. And so we're building the center as a way of making sure that people have the best information to make those decisions.
You mentioned they were developing pills or something. A lady I just met in Charlton, she was part of a study and was paid $3,000 to have about 12 ticks on her arm for 24 hours. And it was a study, and she just told us about it. And she was a placebo group. She didn't know it until later, but supposedly they paid her $3,000 and her husband too, to have ticks on her arm for 24 hours.
And they were developing, trying to develop a pill.
Yes, because she was a placebo group, and the other group, all their ticks died. Hers stayed healthy the whole 3 days.
Was this through Tufts?
I don't know. She was like 6 pounds, but they did say the group said it was a slow push, all their ticks died.
Interesting. So there was a Lyme disease vaccine in the late 1990s, around 2000, it was taken off the market. That same vaccine is trying to be re-released as a different formulation. And there was a trial that was going on in the Cape and Islands to test that. And people were getting remunerated, I think it was $2,500 to take that vaccine, but they weren't being exposed to ticks. I mean, other than the ones they would get naturally, they weren't putting ticks on their arms. Yeah, tell her to reach out. So, NUVEC, we have a webpage. There's more information you can find on our webpage. It's NUVEC, NEWVEC.org. And you can get our email and she can send us an email. Actually, I brought cards.
I have a question pertaining to what you said. I was wondering, why do they have medicine for cats and dogs that kills ticks and fleas? And they take, it's ingested. Why can't we use something like that? And I was gonna ask you about that, because I remember.
That's a good question.
There was a vaccine at one time. I couldn't remember when it was, but I remember hearing about it. There wasn't enough power for it, so they.
Everyone hear that question? So why are there treatments for dogs and cats?
Yeah.
So there's also vaccines for dogs and cats. So there's a couple different vaccines for dogs and cats against Lyme disease. And the sort of flippant answer I get is that dogs and cats don't have lawyers. That's one of the reasons that there's
They
vaccines.
have a lot of money for that stuff.
But
Very
the truth is, so some of the products that are used to kill ticks on dogs and cats, the orals like ivermectin, a group at Tufts is actually studying whether that was developed as a human vaccine to control river blindness in Africa. So it is not a vaccine, it's a human drug. And now it's used on cattle and dogs here, but Tufts is proposing to use it on people. So that kind of thinking is what's going on.
It's out there.
The question is whether people will actually do it. Like, would you take a
Is it
pill?
Is it a poison?
Yes.
So they're just like, what was it called, heartworm?
Yes, it is. Heartworm is treated with ivermectin.
Okay, yeah, it's poison.
They're poisons.
It's a very small amount,
Yeah.
but whatever.
That's right.
So I think I heard you say that most often they get on their feet, work their way up. And I thought you said also you never found one above 1 yard high. Often I'm in the woods and I'll brush under a tree branch. And because I found ticks as a kid in my hair, I always was like, oh, that's where the ticks are getting on. But you're saying really not to worry about that.
Not really likely that they get up here. And what I said is they don't, when we do we torture ticks and put them through different trials. So we'll put them on a stick.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we'll see how high they can climb, and they don't climb much higher. It's not to say that they might not occasionally end up on a branch that's like this high, but for the most part, they're down low. It turns out that black-legged ticks are very susceptible to desiccation. They dry out very easily. They don't have any. They're really, if they weren't so insidious, they'd be very interesting organisms because they don't eat anything except blood. They don't drink water, they don't eat anything except blood. And they also don't have the ability to modify their own, moisture content. So what they do is they just crawl down into leaf litter to keep themselves moist when it's very dry. And that's why they never get too far up because they have to always go down when it gets very dry outside.
In the Caribbean, we go for vacation sometimes. Do they have tick issues there?
Not these kinds of ticks, but they have different kinds of ticks. They also have chiggers, which are mites. Yeah. Mosquitoes are a bigger problem in the Caribbean. I'm happy to stick around and answer more questions if you guys want to just come up or break up, but thank you very much for your time and for coming out tonight.